Zerath Station hung in the void between star systems like a forgotten relic, a massive prison built to hold the galaxy's most dangerous beings. It was the kind of place that existed on no tourist maps, the kind of place where hope went to die. The station's outer rings housed petty criminals and political prisoners, but as you descended deeper into its levels, the temperature dropped and the lights grew dimmer. Down in the lowest level, where even the hardened guards refused to linger longer than their shifts required, lived something that should have been dead centuries ago. They called it the Dragon. The creature's true name was Velcroth, though most simply called him the Unyielding. That name had been earned through blood and fire, through battles that reshaped star systems and toppled empires. Now, crystalline chains forged from compressed starlight bound every limb to the frozen floor. Each chain was thicker than a grown man's torso, glowing with a cold blue light that cast strange shadows across the massive chamber. The dragon hadn't moved in 300 years. His wings were pinned against the ice-covered walls. His tail lay coiled and motionless. But his eyes, vast and ancient as galaxies themselves, still burned with terrible awareness. He was conscious. He had always been conscious. Frozen but awake, trapped in his own mind with nothing but memories and silence for company. Lily Brooks was 17 years old, with dirt permanently lodged under her fingernails and exhaustion settled deep in her bones. She wasn't supposed to be here, not really. Girls from Earth's outer mining colonies weren't supposed to end up serving slop to alien prison guards at the edge of known space. But life had a way of throwing curveballs, and Lily had learned to catch them even when her hands were full. Her father had died in a mining accident 2 years ago. One moment he was kissing her goodbye before his shift, promising to teach her the old songs that night. The next moment, there was an explosion in Shaft 7, and 12 good people never came home. The company had called it negligence, blamed the workers for improper safety protocols, and walked away clean. No benefits. No pension. No apology. Just a one-way ticket to poverty and a stack of medical bills her mother couldn't pay. So here Lily was, 17 and alone, serving meals to prison guards at the edge of nowhere because the pay was decent and they didn't ask too many questions during hiring. Her mother was back on Earth, working 3 jobs to keep their small apartment. Lily sent money home every month, every credit she could spare. It wasn't the life she'd imagined, but it was the life she had. The other species that worked on Zerath Station mocked her work constantly. The towering Kravashi warriors, with their 4 arms and battle scars, sneered at her whenever she passed. To them, a warrior race that valued combat above all else, serving food to others was the lowest form of existence. The telepathic Sen, with their large eyes and ability to read surface thoughts, pitied her. She could feel their sympathy like oil on her skin every time they glanced her way. Even the hive-minded chorus, who worked as one collective consciousness, seemed to look down on her solitary, menial labor. Lily didn't care what they thought. Someone had to feed people, didn't they? Someone had to make sure the guards had hot meals at the end of their shifts. Someone had to scrub the pots and mop the floors and keep the kitchen functioning. Her father had taught her that honest work was nothing to be ashamed of, no matter what anyone else thought. She carried that lesson with her like armor. One evening, while delivering rations to the guards stationed on level 7, Lily heard something that made her stop in her tracks. It was a sound like wind howling through empty canyons, like distant singing carried across vast spaces. The guards never mentioned anything like this. In fact, the guards barely talked about level 7 at all. They took their meals quickly, avoided eye contact, and hurried back to their posts like they were afraid of something. Curiosity pulled at Lily like a string. She followed the sound down a corridor that looked like it hadn't been used in years. Warning signs in 12 different galactic languages lined the walls, all saying variations of the same thing: authorized personnel only. Extreme danger. Do not approach. Lily kept walking. She'd never been good at following rules that didn't make sense. The corridor ended at a massive chamber, and when Lily saw what lay beyond the shimmering energy barrier, her breath caught in her throat. Through the translucent wall of crackling energy, she could see him. The dragon. Scales that looked like they contained entire galaxies, swirling with colors that had no names in human languages. Wings that could have blotted out suns, now pinned helplessly against frozen walls. Eyes that had watched civilizations rise and crumble to dust, now staring at nothing and everything at once. He was completely still, completely alone. The guard station nearby sat empty. No one wanted to watch the dragon. What was there to watch? He'd been frozen like this for centuries, a living statue, a reminder of what happened when you challenged the galactic order. But Lily saw something the others didn't. She saw someone breathing. Someone aware. Someone suffering in absolute silence while the universe moved on without him. The cold radiating from his chamber was intense, biting through her thin work uniform, but she didn't leave. She stood there for a long time, just watching, just thinking. That night, before her shift ended, Lily made a choice that would change everything. She returned to the kitchen, took her own meal ration, a simple vegetable soup that was still warm from the pot, and carried it carefully back down to level 7. Her hands shook slightly as she approached the barrier. She set the bowl down at the energy field's edge, as close as she could get without triggering the alarms. Then she walked away without saying a word. Behind her, in the darkness and cold, ancient eyes followed her retreating form. For the first time in 300 years, Velcroft the Unyielding felt something other than emptiness. He felt confused. He felt curious. He felt something that might have been hope, if he still remembered what hope felt like. The soup sat untouched for 3 days. Lily could see it through the energy barrier each time she returned, the bowl exactly where she'd left it, the contents long since frozen solid in the bitter cold of the chamber. She didn't know if the dragon had even looked at it. Those ancient eyes never seemed to move, never seemed to focus on anything in particular. But Lily returned anyway. Every night after her shift ended, when the other kitchen workers headed to their quarters to sleep or drink or complain about their day, Lily took the cold bowl away and left a fresh one in its place. She never spoke during these visits. Never demanded acknowledgement or explanation. She just left the soup and went about her work, humming old Earth songs her father had taught her. Songs about miners digging deep into asteroids, about finding precious metals in the dark, about coming home to warm beds and warmer arms. The guards on level 7 started to notice her routine, but they said nothing. One of them, a younger Cravashi named Dex who'd been surprisingly kind to her, asked once why she bothered. "It doesn't eat," he'd said, gesturing toward the dragon's chamber with one of his 4 arms. "It doesn't sleep. It just exists. Like a statue." Lily had shrugged. "Maybe," she'd said. "But statues don't breathe, and he does." Dex had looked at her like she was crazy, but he hadn't tried to stop her. On the 4th night, Lily added vegetables to the soup. Small chunks of protein she traded for with another worker. On the 5th night, she brought a different recipe entirely, something with spices from the hydroponics bay that made the whole corridor smell like Earth's autumn. On the 6th night, she sat down cross-legged in front of the barrier after leaving the bowl and talked about her day. Just casual conversation, like she was speaking to an old friend. She told the empty air about how one of the Sen navigators had gotten tipsy on fermented fruit juice and accidentally broadcasted her thoughts to the entire station. About how the head cook had burned an entire batch of protein rations and blamed it on the equipment. About how she'd found a new crack in the wall of her tiny quarters and wondered if the station was falling apart faster than anyone admitted. The dragon never responded. Never moved. Never gave any indication he heard a single word. But Lily kept talking anyway, and when she finally stood to leave, she could have sworn those ancient eyes tracked her movement just slightly. On the 7th night, Lily brought the soup and something else, a small portable music player, one of the few possessions she'd brought from Earth. She set it near the barrier and let it play softly, old folk songs from humanity's mining colonies, melodies that spoke of hard work and harder times but also of perseverance and hope. Then she left, and the music continued playing in the darkness. On the 8th night, everything changed. Lily approached the barrier with her usual bowl of soup, humming along to the tune still playing from her forgotten music device. She set the bowl down and was about to turn away when a voice like rolling thunder filled the chamber. "Why do you waste resources on a corpse, little creature?" Lily froze. The voice was massive, ancient, carrying weight that pressed against her chest like physical force. But there was no anger in it, no cruelty. Only genuine confusion, as if the dragon truly couldn't understand what she was doing. She turned slowly to face him. Those galaxy-filled eyes were focused now, directly on her. For the first time, she could see intelligence there, awareness, a mind that had watched civilizations rise and fall. Lily paused in her cleaning of the previous day's bowl. She didn't flinch or run, though her heart hammered in her chest. "You're breathing," she said simply, keeping her voice steady. "Breathing things get hungry." The silence that followed stretched so long that Lily thought the conversation was over before it had really begun. She went back to her work, scrubbing the bowl clean, but she could feel those ancient eyes watching her every movement. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, the dragon spoke again. "I have not tasted anything in 340 years." Lily looked up at him, really looked at him, and for the first time saw past the scales and chains and legendary terror. She saw someone who'd been alone for longer than her great-great-grandparents had been alive. Someone who'd been conscious but unable to move, aware but unable to act, alive but unable to live. Well, Lily said, stirring the fresh soup to release its steam into the frigid air, that's a long time to go without dinner. Like, an insanely long time. I get cranky if I skip lunch. She couldn't breach the barrier. The energy field was designed to keep anything from passing through, and she didn't have the clearance to shut it down even if she wanted to. But she could push the bowl as close as possible to the barrier's edge, close enough that its warmth might reach through somehow, might offer some small comfort in the endless cold. It was a small gesture. Probably meaningless in the scope of galactic justice and ancient crimes. The dragon had done terrible things, things that had earned him this prison. Everyone knew the stories. But sitting here in front of him, seeing the awareness in his eyes, hearing the loneliness in his voice, Lily couldn't help but think that maybe 300 years of frozen isolation was enough punishment for anyone. She settled down on the cold floor, her back against the wall near the barrier, and opened her own meal container. I'm going to eat my dinner here tonight, she said casually. Hope you don't mind the company. The dragon said nothing, but his eyes never left her. And in the silence between them, something shifted. Some invisible wall, thicker than the energy barrier, began to crack. For the first time in centuries, Velcroft the Unyielding wasn't entirely alone. And for the first time since her father died, Lily Brooks felt like maybe, just maybe, she'd done something that mattered. 3 months into their friendship, Lily asked the question everyone else was too afraid to voice. It came out one night when she was particularly tired, her defenses worn down by a double shift in the kitchen. She'd brought the usual soup, but this time she also brought curiosity she could no longer contain. What did you do? To end up here? The words left her mouth before she could stop them, and immediately she regretted it. This was personal, painful territory. But the question hung in the cold air between them, impossible to take back. Velcroft was silent for so long that Lily thought he wouldn't answer. She busied herself with arranging the soup bowl, adjusting its position unnecessarily, feeling awkward and intrusive. Minutes passed. Then more minutes. The only sound was the faint hum of the energy barrier and the distant clank of pipes somewhere in the station's infrastructure. Finally, when Lily had almost given up hope of an answer, the dragon spoke. His voice was different this time, heavy with a weight that seemed to press down on the entire chamber. It was the voice of someone carrying regret that had calcified over centuries into something harder and sharper than any chain. I was a guardian once, he began, and Lily stopped fidgeting to listen. This was eons before the current galactic order, before the council, before most of the species you see walking these halls had even developed space travel. My kind, we were old even then. Ancient. And we had taken it upon ourselves to protect the younger species. Lily sat down slowly, her back against the wall, giving him her full attention. The dragon's eyes seemed to look past her, past the walls, into a distant past that only he could see. We shepherded civilizations through their evolution, he continued. We defended them from the dark things that hunted between stars, creatures and forces that would have snuffed out entire species before they had a chance to truly live. It was noble work. Important work. I believed in it with everything I was. There was a pause, and Lily could sense the shift coming, the turn in the story that would explain the chains, the prison, the centuries of isolation. But power, Velcroft said softly, corrupts slowly. Especially when you live long enough to forget why you first sought it. Especially when you're strong enough that no one can tell you no. His voice grew quieter, more introspective. It started small. A suggestion here, a requirement there. We began making decisions for the species we protected. After all, we knew better, didn't we? We'd seen civilizations rise and fall. We understood the patterns. Lily hugged her knees to her chest, listening intently. She could see where this was going, could feel the tragedy building. My protection became control, the dragon admitted, each word seeming to cost him something. My guidance became domination. I told myself it was for their own good, that I was preventing suffering, avoiding mistakes I'd seen other species make. But the truth was simpler and uglier than that. I enjoyed the power. I enjoyed being feared and obeyed. I enjoyed playing God. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop even further, or maybe it was just the chill of the story itself. By the time I understood what I'd become, millions had died under my rule. Entire planets had been reshaped to fit my vision of how things should be. Species that refused to submit were eliminated. I convinced myself it was necessary, that I was creating a perfect order. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. I was wrong. I was so terribly, horrifically wrong. Lily felt tears prickling at her eyes, though she wasn't entirely sure why. Maybe it was the raw honesty in his voice, the genuine remorse. Maybe it was recognizing that even ancient, powerful beings could make mistakes that haunted them forever. When the coalition finally formed, Velcroth continued, when they gathered enough strength to challenge me, I saw what I'd become reflected in their eyes. The fear. The hatred. The desperation. I saw myself as they saw me, not a guardian, but a tyrant. A monster. He shifted slightly, the chains clinking softly with the movement. It was the first time Lily had seen him move at all in their months of conversation. So when they finally caught me, he said quietly, I didn't resist. I was tired, small one. So tired of being what I'd become. I wanted it to end. But they couldn't kill you, Lily said softly, finally understanding the full scope of his tragedy. It wasn't just punishment. It was eternal imprisonment because death wasn't an option. No, Velcroth confirmed. My kind cannot die by conventional means. We simply exist. Forever, unless destroyed by forces that haven't been seen in this universe for eons. So the coalition did the only thing they could. They built this place. They forged these chains from compressed starlight, the one substance that could hold me. And here I remain, as I should. A monster in a cage, conscious and aware, paying for crimes that can never be undone. Lily sat with the bowl of soup growing cold in her hands, processing everything she'd heard. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was contemplative, shared. Finally, she spoke. My dad used to say that people aren't just the worst thing they've ever done. He said people are also every moment they choose to be better. She looked up at the dragon, meeting those ancient eyes directly. You stopped fighting. You let them catch you. You could have kept going, kept destroying, but you didn't. That counts for something. That has to count for something. Your father sounds wise, Velcroth said gently, something like warmth entering his voice for the first time since he'd started his story. I would have liked to meet him. Lily's expression clouded over, pain flickering across her face. He died in a mining accident. 2 years ago. The alarm started at 0300 hours, screaming through every corridor of Zerath station like wounded animals. Lily jerked awake in her tiny bunk, her heart already racing before her mind fully understood what was happening. Red emergency lights flooded her quarters, turning everything the color of blood. She was in the kitchen levels when the first explosion hit. The blast was so powerful it knocked her off her feet, sending her crashing into a prep counter. Pots and pans rained down around her, clattering against the metal floor. Her ears rang with a high-pitched whine that wouldn't stop. For a moment, she just lay there, stunned and confused, trying to make sense of what was happening. Then the station's emergency broadcast kicked in, a mechanical voice repeating the same message over and over, hull breach detected. Hostile forces confirmed. All personnel to designated evacuation points. This is not a drill. Cravashi raiders. That's what the panicked voices in the hallways were shouting. An elite strike team had somehow breached the outer hull, led by Commander Thrax himself, a warlord whose name appeared on wanted posters across 40 different worlds. The raiders had come for their imprisoned brothers, the Cravashi war criminals locked in the upper levels. But rumors were already spreading through the chaos, they'd come for something else too. Something bigger. Something in the depths. They'd come for the dragon. Emergency protocols slammed into effect. Blast doors dropped throughout the station, sealing off sections, trapping people wherever they stood. The lights flickered and died in some corridors, plunging them into darkness broken only by emergency strips. Guards scrambled to defensive positions, their weapons charging up with distinctive whines. In the prison blocks, inmates saw their chance and began rioting, shaking bars and screaming for freedom. Everyone ran toward the escape pods. Lily could hear the stampede of feet above her, the desperate rush of people trying to save their own lives. She couldn't blame them. This was exactly the kind of nightmare scenario everyone who worked on Zerath Station secretly feared, a coordinated attack, systems failing, chaos taking over. Everyone ran toward safety. Everyone except Lily. She ran down. Down through the chaos, down past the fighting, down toward the lowest level where the dragon waited. People shouted at her as she ran the wrong way, called her crazy, tried to grab her arm and redirect her. She shook them off and kept running, her work boots pounding against metal grating, her breath coming in gasps. Another explosion rocked the station. This one was closer, somewhere in the mid-levels. The floor buckled beneath her feet and she stumbled, catching herself against a wall. Smoke was filling the corridors now, acrid and choking. Emergency sprinklers kicked on, dousing everything in cold water that made the metal floors treacherous. Lily didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The thought of Velcroft down there, chained and helpless while the station fell apart around him, while raiders used him for their own purposes, it made something fierce and protective flare up in her chest. He was her friend. And friends didn't abandon each other, no matter what. She reached level 7 to find the security checkpoint abandoned. The guards had fled or been called to defend more critical areas. The corridor ahead was darker than usual, lit only by flickering emergency lights that made everything look wrong and threatening. But Lily knew this path by heart now. She'd walked it every night for 3 months. What she found in the dragon's chamber made her blood run cold. The energy barrier was still up, but inside, Velcroft was surrounded by Cravashi engineers in heavy armor. They'd brought equipment, lots of it, including a massive device that looked like a mechanical spider. They were in the process of attaching it to the dragon's head, working quickly and efficiently despite the chaos erupting throughout the station. Lily recognized the device from training materials she'd seen. It was a neural subjugation unit, illegal Sen technology that could override a consciousness and turn even the strongest-willed being into a puppet. They were going to enslave him. Turn him into a weapon for their fleet. Commander Thrax stood off to the side, watching his engineers work. He was huge even by Cravashi standards, his 4 arms covered in ceremonial scars that marked him as one of their most decorated warriors. He noticed Lily the moment she stepped into the chamber entrance, and his laugh was like grinding gravel. A human child? On a prison station? His voice carried genuine amusement, as if her presence was the funniest thing he'd seen all day. He drew his plasma rifle with one of his upper arms, the weapon powering up with an ominous hum. You die quick, little thing. Call it mercy for your species' weakness. Every instinct Lily had screamed at her to run. She was 17, unarmed, facing a warlord and his elite team. This was suicide. This was madness. But she looked past Thrax, past the engineers and their horrible device, and met Velcroth's eyes. Those ancient, galaxy-filled eyes that had watched her bring soup every night. That had listened to her stories. That had shared their own painful truths with her. And Lily made a choice. She didn't run. Instead, she walked forward, directly toward them. The engineers stopped working, confused by this behavior. Thrax's laugh died in his throat, replaced by wariness. This wasn't how prey was supposed to act. Lily walked straight past the engineers, past the weapons pointed at her, past every logical thought screaming in her head. She reached the control panel for the energy barrier, the one she'd walked by hundreds of times but never touched. Her maintenance override code, given to her so she could clean guard stations and kitchen areas, technically worked on any non-critical system in her assigned levels. She had no idea if it would work on the dragon's prison. But she was about to find out. Lily punched in her code with trembling fingers and watched as the energy barrier flickered. Once. Twice. Then it disappeared completely, the humming field collapsing into nothing. The chamber fell silent. Everyone froze, unable to process what this insane human girl had just done. The Galactic Council convened within 24 hours of the incident on Zirath Station. When the call went out, representatives from 1,000 worlds dropped everything to attend. This wasn't a scheduled meeting or routine session. This was an emergency that had every government in known space on edge. The dragon was free. Velcroft the Unyielding, locked away for 3 centuries, was no longer chained. The council chamber was massive, a circular room that could hold thousands of beings from hundreds of different species. Holographic projections filled the space, allowing representatives from distant worlds to attend virtually. The air hummed with translation devices working overtime, converting speech into every known language simultaneously. Security was everywhere, armed guards from a dozen different militaries standing ready in case things went wrong. Velcroft stood in the center of it all, unchained, free, and theoretically capable of returning to his ancient ways of conquest and domination. His mere presence made the chamber feel smaller, as if reality itself bent around him. Representatives whispered nervously to each other. Some had been alive during his reign of terror and remembered the fear firsthand. Others only knew the stories, but the stories were terrifying enough. The assembled representatives of 1,000 worlds waited in tense silence, watching the dragon with expressions ranging from fear to anger to barely contained panic. Weapon systems hidden in the chamber's walls powered up subtly, ready to activate at the first sign of aggression. Everyone knew the weapons would be useless against him, but it made them feel slightly safer anyway. But Velcroft didn't speak. He didn't threaten or demand. Instead, he simply looked down at the human girl standing beside him, and the gentleness in that gesture shocked everyone in the room more than any display of power could have. Lily stepped forward. She was 17 years old, barely an adult by human standards, wearing a stained kitchen uniform that still smelled faintly of soup and vegetables. Her work boots squeaked slightly on the polished floor. She looked impossibly small and out of place, addressing the most powerful beings in known space. But she lifted her chin and met their eyes without flinching. "You all saw a prisoner," she said simply, her voice steady despite the way her hands trembled. "I just saw someone who needed a friend." The chamber erupted in murmurs. Several representatives spoke over each other, their translated voices creating a chaos of sound. A Kravashi delegate stood up aggressively, all four arms gesturing wildly. A Sen counselor pressed fingers to their temples, trying to sort through the emotional noise flooding the room. The head of the council, an ancient being made of crystallized light, had to call for order 3 times before the room finally quieted. The Sen counselor, one of the oldest telepathic beings still alive, spoke carefully. Her large eyes fixed on Lily with an intensity that made the girl want to squirm. The chains were designed to hold for eternity. They were forged from compressed starlight, reinforced with technology from 16 different civilizations. They were supposed to be impossible to break. She paused, choosing her words precisely. "What weapon did you use?" "Soup," Lily said. The council chamber erupted in confusion. Someone laughed, though it sounded more hysterical than amused. Others shouted that this was impossible, that the human was lying, that there must be some other explanation. The Kravashi delegate who'd stood earlier roared something in his native language that the translators mercifully didn't convert. Lily waited for the noise to die down, then continued calmly, as if she was explaining something obvious to children. "And conversation. And showing up every night even when he didn't respond. That's what humans do." She shrugged, a simple gesture that somehow carried more weight than any grand speech. "We're really good at caring about things we probably shouldn't. At trying when it's stupid to try. At bringing soup to dragons." The Kravashi representative slammed his fist down on his console, cracking the screen. "This makes no sense. Kindness cannot break starlight chains. Physics doesn't work that way. The universe doesn't work that way." But the Sen counselor was reviewing data on her display, her expression shifting from skepticism to wonder to something that looked almost like fear. Energy readings from the dragon's chamber over the past 3 months, temperature fluctuations, molecular analysis of the broken chains. She read through it all twice, then a third time, unable to believe what the evidence was telling her. "The chains didn't break from force," she said slowly, her voice carrying across the now silent chamber. Every representative leaned forward, hanging on her words. "They melted from heat. But not the heat of weapons or fusion or any energy source we recognize." She looked up at Lily with something like awe in her ancient eyes. "Biological heat. The warmth of living presence, sustained over months. Concentrated through countless small acts of care." The Sen counselor's voice grew softer, almost reverent. She loved him back to freedom." The chamber fell into absolute silence. No one knew what to say to that. It defied everything they understood about the universe, about power, about justice. But the evidence was right there in the data, undeniable. Velcroft finally spoke, his voice gentle. "I propose this. Let me serve as this human's guardian. I will help her find justice for her father, whose death was falsely blamed on his own negligence. I will ensure no one else suffers as her family did. And in doing so, I will remember what I was meant to be, not a conqueror, but a protector." The debate that followed lasted 3 hours. Representatives argued about precedent, about security, about whether redemption was even possible for crimes so vast. But in the end, moved by arguments they didn't fully understand but somehow felt in their hearts, the council agreed to a probationary release. 1 ancient dragon, 1 human girl, free to travel the stars together. 2 weeks later, aboard a small ship equipped with an excellent kitchen, Lily prepared their first meal in true freedom. Soup, of course.